Hello, welcome to the channel. My name is Matthew Millais Gray, and I'm very pleased that I can be with you and that you are here. So thank you for the visit. So I have a very important thing to talk about today because it really is a question which provides a way to determine what is the next step when it comes to a coercive situation where an organization, and in my case it's the experience with a high control religion known as Jehovah's Witnesses, is instructing its congregation to do something that is both illegal and against its own governing body direction. And so Jehovah's Witnesses come under criticism for their shunning policy. It was previously known as disfellowshipping. Now it's known as removal. But of course it also has the means to remove privileges and all kinds of things in a disciplinary way, which can make a person's life very, very difficult, and it can make it very difficult and even dangerous for that person and family and friends, besides the actual liability, which is putting congregants into danger. And so what happens in that high control system is something that was used as a way to discipline a person agreeably when they became a Jehovah's Witness, or let's say obvious infractions, actually becomes weaponized and a way to silence persons who have noticed that actually within leadership, I call them the weeds, that they have created a potential liability and made it very, very dangerous for persons that they are expecting must obey them blindly, without question. And so I've had some reports recently. When I say recently, when this video has been recorded, it has been the same day that I received this report. But I have also had similar reports that have come in. And so this particular question that I'm going to raise is applicable, because some persons say, well, maybe we should just let it all go. Watchtower, Bible and Tract Society, or elders that create harm are far too powerful. We must just let the community come to harm as an unfortunate part of human reality, so that it creates a saturation point where that harm is unbearable for society, which then forces change. So it's an interesting thing to ponder, because some persons might say, well, you're just letting things go, but you've witnessed actual problems, or you've witnessed crime, or you've witnessed coercion, or you're right in the middle of it, or you are suffering because your entire livelihood has disappeared, or your family is in danger, or you are in danger and it's no way to live. There's all kinds of complications with this. And yes, religions like Jehovah's Witnesses and other systems that replicate that, because it's not unique to Jehovah's Witnesses, other systems where there are weeds or abuses within those, let's say, systems that are created with the intention of being noble, or that are joined by persons who believe those systems to be noble, has within it a terrible, horrible weaponized system that creates unjust situations, not just for one person, but in the case that I've been exploring here, are many, many abuses. And you might be thinking that I'm just using one particular example. Might be a focus just for the sake of clarity, but the abuses run very, very deep. And I have been asked by those that have a faithful intention within Jehovah's Witnesses, they've asked me, Matt, do you not think it's time to burn down the house? And I say, I am a preservationist. I am a preservationist and somebody who respects genuine persons' right to practice free worship under constitution, under law, under a society that wants and finds ways to protect freedom of worship and free speech, so that we have a system that is somewhat free. We'll get into this idea of freedom in a little bit more detail. But I got a few notes, and I thought I would just go through these notes and discuss why I feel we need to, or I need to, look into these things in a little bit more detail, because it affects what can be done next or what shouldn't be done next. Remember, in some of my videos, I've said I've now brought this matter to the city gates, which is a scriptural principle based on Matthew 18:15-35. Agree or disagree, but that is the way that I have done things. So here is the question. Let's see if I can make it a little bit clearer, or even just repeat it and maybe build upon it later. Here's the question. Is there a point whereby a legal system like what Jehovah's Witnesses use or similar high control organizations use, who expertly outmaneuver potential liabilities and alleged crimes? It seems that from my experience, which I use as a microcosm of society to examine society's issues at large, it seems that Jehovah's Witnesses is a sort of laboratory experiment of where the legal system fails for justice, but is tolerated as part of the modern system, allowing for criminal elements to exist as a kind of, again I'll repeat, societal tolerance so that life isn't impossible. Now, I wonder if that makes sense to our listeners, to our viewers. So in other words, is the law recognizing that crime must exist just as much as humans exist, so that there is freedom for humans to move around? So perhaps this is a difficult way that I am describing it. I'm hoping it is an important question, not just an unsettling question. Am I trying to be profound? Well, I would like to be clear. That's what I would like to be. I'd like to ask a question here that essentially is sitting in the intersection of jurisprudence, sociology, and moral philosophy. It's not something that deep thinkers have not pondered about. Many thinkers have quietly or openly acknowledged that law and justice are not synonymous, and that some systems persist precisely because they reveal the limits of law's reach. So let's see if we can unpack this on a few dimensions. Just try and get organized here on my desk and access my notes a little bit more comfortably. Let's see if I can do that. So here's the first one to consider: the limits of law and the role of tolerated injustice. So what am I trying to get into here? Well, I'm trying to describe what Michel Foucault, I'm going to spell it just in case I've butchered his name, M-I-C-H-E-L, Michel, F-O-U-C-A-U-L-T, Foucault, and thinkers like them, when they call it productive function of power. I don't know if you caught that. Productive function of power. What is it? That systems of control and even injustice are not necessarily accidents. What? Yeah. They're integral components of how societies self-regulate. You can call it a paradox of our existence, or a catch of our existence, right? Or limitations. So, modern systems, modern legal systems, enforcement systems are structurally put in place where there, how can I say this? There is a toleration to preserve the broader, I want to say Maya. I think that is appropriate. Illusion. Why? An illusion of freedom. So humans need to feel free. Humans need to feel, rightly or wrongly, that they're not overly micromanaged, not overly observed, that they have a place of privacy, for instance. That helps for good psychological outlook. Whether it's true or not, whether we have reached a stage technologically where that's absolutely impossible, there needs to be that sense, and that's why I say illusion, of where humans feel that there is freedom, there is some kind of privacy or means to move around and function healthily. So certain powerful or insular entities, like in my experience, Jehovah's Witnesses, and it's not just that, it's any kind of system that has humans which can corrupt that system. In Jehovah's Witnesses, I say it's the weeds among the wheat. Okay? Because remember, I'm a preservationist. That's my viewpoint. I would like to protect things for persons that are genuine. I'd like to protect things for family or for friends or for loved ones. And persons might say, Matt, you've just got to cut this off. Just totally cut it. Well, how do I cut off commitments? How do I cut off family? How do I cut off loved ones? How do I cut off persons who have contacted me for help and are saying, Matt, we're stuck. We're trapped. And at all kinds of levels. Local congregation level, even within branch and leadership levels. This is what I've discovered. All the way up to even governing body level. This has been my observation. So yeah, this is heavy stuff. Is it always heavy stuff? Yes, it is heavy stuff. That's why making these videos, it is very heavy stuff. It's to many even crippling. So some injustices are structurally tolerated to preserve this illusion of freedom. And so Jehovah's Witnesses, as an example, as this microcosm of greater society or other systems that are similar to it, they act as test zones. What are you talking about, Matt? What do you mean test zones? Yeah, like an experiment. It's a test zone where law meets its ethical limits. It's a contained anomaly that exposes within human society the system that cannot or will not address without unraveling its own premises. So Jehovah's Witnesses make up, you could say, a fascinating case study in legal immunity. They are like a sovereign state among international boundaries. They cross those boundaries. And that is a very interesting thing about religion in general, is that it can exist internationally in these ways. And so Jehovah's Witnesses have, through many decades, over 100 years, almost 150 years, maybe even more, have refined litigation, legal procedures. They've refined it, and Jehovah's Witnesses have become this very interesting prototype for what might be called religious legal engineering. Somebody wants to abuse the legal system. Take a look. Learn a lot. And you can be sure that those with nefarious ideas absolutely do look at the limits of the legal system. Now, that also applies for those that want to use the legal system for their benefit or don't even have nefarious motivations. They look at it and they go, well, what's the problem with society? Let's see if we can have a greater, higher ethic and fix things. And so we examine this microcosm of human society, Jehovah's Witnesses, and we see what can we learn from it? Can we adjust law? And that's what we see in places like Norway when they discuss ideas such as psychological violence. So, the internal legal architecture within Jehovah's Witnesses, the theocratic hierarchy, or what do we say, ecclesiastical privilege, and volunteer association. When it comes to doctrines, and all of these things all together, it functions like a shadow jurisdiction. So courts often refrain from interfering because Western law treats religion as a semi-sovereign domain. Jehovah's Witnesses tell you we are a kingdom. This is a kingdom under Christ. How we believe it, according to our doctrine, according to our setup, according to our Bible, according to the way we interpret things. So yes, it functions like a shadow jurisdiction. And so courts say, we're not interfering with this. This is going against constitutional rights and the way that humans can live. And so they don't touch it. Why? It's safeguarded by the constitutional freedoms that have been put in place. So yes, in a sense, they demonstrate what happens when a group refines, evades, and masters these legal loopholes. It uses religious liberty and says, right, how do we create this mini state within a state? How do we get legal protection? Now, this might happen organically. This might not have some kind of master control. This may just be happening in a natural way. This may just be human development. Okay? Right? And so when it does that, morality becomes opaque in the complexity of the machine that is legally protecting itself. So the system has an awareness of its own paradox. Supreme courts, they look at paradoxes. That's what they deal with. They look at catch-22s. They look at double binds. And they go, as I've described in other videos, they say, right, look, how do we keep the status quo? We realize that things aren't great for humanity, but how do we make it to the best degree possible that we're as functional as we optimally can? I don't know if that makes sense. So yeah, it's a paradox. So you have legal philosophers, right? Like Lon Fuller. That's one. H.L.A. Hart. Now they argue, they say that law itself is a moral compromise. It knows it cannot eliminate wrongdoing. It can only contain it within tolerable bounds. Right? And so you might think of a science fiction character, or I do, I think of Judge Dredd. I remember a statement that he made was something like, no single citizen is innocent. We are just here as judges to measure the degree of crime. So I remember that as a child thinking, wow, that's a profound statement, right? So it would come into that argument. So yes, you have a psychologist who studies criminology, for instance, or yeah, the school of criminology just in itself. Every society requires some level of deviance to define and reaffirm its moral order. Total purity is unworkable. Humans have a dark side, they have a light side. They have a profane side, they have a sacred side. That is the human condition. So entities like Jehovah's Witnesses, they persist not despite their contradictions, but because they occupy a useful role. So we hear, oh, this feels like a social experiment. Or, man, is the CIA connected to this? Or Freemasonry or Illuminati? Well, look, if you're part of human society, it's all interconnected. How is it not connected? Maybe that's the question that should be asked. So, yes, it occupies this, you can say, useful role. Again, let me put my disclaimer. Treat this discussion as an academic discussion, thesis with antithesis for synthesis. Approach it with a healthy, skeptical view. Use essential critical thinking when going through this information. And here's another thing I'd like to add. So yes, I'm plugging my usual mantra or usual disclaimer, but the idea is to be solution oriented. That's what this is all about. It's not there to sit and complain and go, oh man, isn't it just terrible what's happened? It is terrible what happens in these systems, these injustices. They're terrible. I feel it. Can tell you all kinds of stories, all sorts of personal stories, not just recently, but for years upon years upon years upon years. And people ask me, they say, Matt, what is your life story? And I look at it and I go, man, do you really want to hear a life story? Or shall we get to the chase of the matter? Shall we get to what is the important matter right now? And that is safety of community, protection of people, upholding of justice, so that there is a standard where we as humans can function without it just becoming unbearable. People having to go into exile, staying in exile, being fearful for their lives, or not necessarily fearful, but having to work in such a way that, man, you're having to check your back the whole time because of the dangers. So Jehovah's Witnesses reveal how far freedom of religion can actually stretch before it actually breaks. It serves as a stress test for the judiciary boundaries between conscience, authority, and public safety. So they keep alive the ancient dialectic between legal order and moral chaos, both necessary, I'm going to say, for our development, our transcendence, or if you want to say evolution, getting to, let's hope, a better place. Right? So when does the system finally respond? What does it take? Well, historically, law only moves when moral consensus shifts, when tolerance of harm becomes such a thing, gets to such a saturation point, that reputation is just ruined or breaking, or there's an existential risk. We're going to blow each other to pieces, or we're going to go to war, or resources are just not there, or we're killing each other, or whatever. Crime has got out of hand. And so there's this existential risk to the state itself, to society itself. That's the kind of breaking point that often has to happen historically before the change comes into play. People warn, people warn, people warn. That's what it's got to take. It's got to take this crisis example. And we can think of one in Japan recently with, and I don't want to promote one religion above another or bring one down, but this is just what happened. The Moonies, or the religion formerly known as the Moonies, that created a big analysis by government because they were saying, sure, this programming, it opens up a line that is just dangerous. We can't allow this to happen. And so that impacted in Jehovah's Witnesses recently with the new ways that they were trying to present education, or this idea of higher education. And you could say, well, they used different language, or they tried to soften it, tried to open it up after years of being very, very tight. And what was that all about? It seems that the trigger was a place like Japan, which said, hey, enough is enough is enough. We don't like it. It looks like an offshoot or a similar kind of thing like MK Ultra. We don't like it. Not good. Open to abuses. And let's be very careful when it comes to human psychology, and make sure that there's the right kind of safety nets in place so that these awful situations don't replicate. And so, yeah, you can say that the idea is being responsible. It touched government in that particular case. Unfortunately, tragically. So, here's another example. And again, I don't want to put one religion above another. Remember, every system has got its good, it's got its bad, right? Moonies, it's got its good, it's got its bad. Jehovah's Witnesses, I say, it's got its wheat, good people, it's got its weeds, bad people, right? So Catholic Church, here's one. because Catholic Church came under massive spotlight, and there were huge changes that happened because of the crisis that essentially, what can I say, forced global legal adaptation. In other words, mandatory reporting laws, civil suits, compensation schemes for persons that faced abuse within the church. And yeah, you can say this was scandalous. Should be scandalous. But it created the necessary changes, or it got the ball rolling at least to make some of those changes. So, Jehovah's Witnesses. Similar shifts may occur, are occurring within Jehovah's Witnesses, especially as international human rights frameworks begin to recognize psychological coercion and spiritual abuse. And there's all sorts of forms of coercion within Jehovah's Witnesses from the weed class. It's not just one, there's several examples. Take your pick. And so those human rights frameworks are beginning to realize or recognize, oh, psychological coercion. This isn't cool. Huh. Oh, here's another one, spiritual abuse. We don't like that. We actually recognize it as forms of violence. Norway has been discussing that, or we hear about laws changing to recognize psychological violence. And let's be clear about psychological violence. It's not just name calling. It's not just man, I feel like you bullied me by calling me stupid. Although that does come into it, and you can say, well, yeah, that's a problem. But we're talking about something where it has affected people to such a degree that people have lost lives. People have gone postal. There have been terrible, terrible situations that have happened as a result of that psychological violence. So you've got to realize that, yeah, the way that humans work is through psychology. Psychology leads to actions. So it is a complex thing. It isn't just, oh, you know, I got my feelings hurt today. It's a very complex thing. So psychological coercion, spiritual abuse, these are recognized or gaining traction as being recognized as forms of violence. But the law moves very slowly, and often only after the system's victims have already paid the moral price for society's inertia. It happened with me. I think about Hamburg, Germany. That is on record, folks. What happened there? I think about Colorado. In fact, I can just go into lists of these things. Yeah. So I'm hoping that this is a deeper insight. I'm hoping that the intuition that I am sharing here is one whereby law is supposed to recognize that, yeah, crime must exist as much as humans exist, but we need to put in the right kind of safety nets to make it more tolerable. We can't just put a blind eye to it. Or maybe that's the question. We say, well, maybe we leave it. Maybe we got to leave it. And I've heard persons say that, say, just let go of this. Just let go. Organically, it's going to sort itself out. And then I hear other persons saying, no, we are going to make the change. We've got families stuck in this. We've got people suffering in this. We've got people in modern slavery. being harmed by this. We can't let it go. It's living with us. And so I go by my name, Gray. I say all points of view, black, white, and everything in between, all colors of the spectrum. So I look at somebody who is working very hard to make changes and I go, you're essential. I look at somebody who says, well, my approach is as a peacemaker, I'm just going to let it happen organically. So maybe that's them letting this person who's got the passion or who's more touched by it or touched by the problem a lot more or affected a lot more by it. Maybe that is the facet of our existence, one of the facets or one of the colors of the spectrum, and all these colors adding up. And it's this great synthesis to change. So, in theological or existential terms, one might say, the law is not built to end evil. Huh? Yeah. The law is built to contain it in forms that civilization can live with. Yeah, you're hearing me repeat these things just in different ways. And so what some call a laboratory experiment is also a mirror. It's a mirror into our personality. It's a mirror into us. So the Jehovah's Witness organization, like certain corporations or states, shows how power behaves when it becomes perfectly adapted to the rule of law without being ruled by it. So, maybe we should expand upon this a little bit more. Perhaps we should call this tolerated injustice, law and freedom, and the theocratic exception. Maybe that's what we should call it. Tying in legal theory or theology and people's lived insights, my experience, your experience, so that we can see this rule of law, and where persons are not being ruled by it, and we can decide, do we leave it? Do we do something about it? I don't think people generally are unaware of how some organizations seem almost untouchable. They operate in a space where law exists, but justice does not. Now remember, we said there's this duality in our human existence, in our human nature. We've also mentioned that groups like Jehovah's Witnesses and others with highly structured internal legal systems gives us a glimpse of something very unsettling, something very disturbing, but something very human. They function as, I've mentioned it, living laboratories. It tests the limits of our legal frameworks. It shows exactly where the law bends and sometimes where it breaks. And so when there's moral complexity, there's a break. There's an ethical crisis. That's where the law is weak. The law cannot be omnipotent. What do I mean by this? Well, society has a built-in tolerance for certain kinds of harm, for the same reason that it tolerates human imperfection, because total enforcement is impossible without crushing freedom itself, our ability to breathe. our ability to move around, to go to the beach, to wear a particular outfit. And so this is a difficult truth to face for many, because law is not synonymous with justice. It is in many ways a system of containment. It defines the boundaries, it mediates disputes, and it punishes overt crimes. But it cannot, and perhaps should not, attempt to eliminate every form of wrongdoing. Some wrongdoing exists as a structural constant, tolerated just enough so that life can continue. I am somebody who is familiar with business. I come from a business background. And I remember finding all kinds of criminal activity within the business. And I remember reporting it to my father, and my father said, "You know what will happen, Matt?" He says, "We'll eliminate this person. We'll eliminate this person. This person gets fired. This person..." He says, "We're going to bring in another person, and the same thing is going to occur. So let's build into our systems a way to compensate for it. And let's watch this person become familiar with what they're doing and see if we can limit it. Because as soon as we remove that person, it's like a reset." So look, we grow over time, things change, businesses change, our ideas change, but I remember that as being an important thing that I learnt from a young age in that business. And it stayed with me for a very, very long time, even to this day. So I think about that idea. And so, yeah, some wrongdoing, it's tolerated just enough so that life or your business can continue. Otherwise, it would just come to a complete and utter grinding halt. Jehovah's Witnesses illustrate this in sharp relief. They've learned over decades, how do we navigate legal loopholes? Is it always nefarious? Or is it just persons doing their job and it builds and it builds and it builds and the system becomes very, very sophisticated, preemptively shaping policies and language to remain protected while remaining internally with control? So in a modern legal sense, Jehovah's Witnesses and those like it, and again, it's a mixture of wheat and weeds at this stage. You've got persons who use it for good and you've got persons that use it for bad, right? So it acts almost like a shadow jurisdiction. In fact, it does, right? In many respects. So it's a theocratic microcosm where freedom of religion is leveraged to shield the organization from accountability. Here's a liability, deflected. And so yet the system tolerates it. Why? Because legal systems are aware of their own limits. So they recognize that crime, coercion, and moral compromise are tragically part of the human condition. Law cannot eradicate them. It can only contain them. So groups like this, Jehovah's Witnesses, others like it, they exist on this razor, or on this edge. And it reveals both the power and the limitations of modern jurisprudence. Now, history. What does that tell us? History tells us, or it shows us, that, yeah, these limits are not permanent. This situation is not permanent. Because when harm becomes undeniable and moral consensus shifts, which we hope is happening in the positive way now, okay, that's the hope, that's when law reacts. It's slow, it's painful, and after a great deal of suffering has occurred. And so we've seen this with institutions that once seemed untouchable. Tower of iron. And inside it's just rusty and it suddenly collapses. Yeah, that's your religious hierarchy or your corporations. That's, you know, it's not just religion. Shielded by all of these structures and privilege, change comes. When a society collectively acknowledges the cost of the tolerance, saying, oh man, can't do this. Or it gets to an absolute breaking point and it just, yeah, it's saturated. You know, society is saturated with it. And so maybe that's the lesson. So the lesson is that law is not built to end evil. It's only to contain it. Why? Again, woven this in as a thread so that humanity can survive, so humanity can move. So the witnesses, in their shadow jurisdiction, it reveals this truth in actually a clear way as any other case in history. We're in this information age, and so the amount of information that's out there, it's profound. We didn't have this before in the 90s or in the 80s. We have tremendous info. In fact, even 10 years ago, AI has contributed a tremendous amount to exposure and, of course, the internet as well. And so, yeah, society's tolerance, you know, it's a shield, but it's also a mirror. And it shows us where we fall short. If we're objective enough and we have the right kind of essential critical thinking, that is where we can see justice must rise. Because we're saying, if we don't, we are going to cut the planet into pieces. We are going to cut society into pieces. We can't carry on like this. We can't have children growing up and they're just going to be damaged. It's just going to be terrible. It'll be an idiocracy. Can't function like that. So, the law is not built to end evil, only to contain it in ways that humanity can survive. So I want to say thank you very much for coming with me this far and for listening and for participating. I want to say thank you very much for those that leave comments and who interact. I heard a story today from somebody who says, Matt, I was at a Kingdom Hall and a person took off their belt and beat a 2-year-old in an incredibly disturbing way. Not a smack. So that's the corporal punishment story. This has been going on for years. Not at home, at Kingdom Halls. And the persons believe that they are upholding the supreme sovereign of the universe, Jehovah God, the giver of life. They believe that they are doing the right thing. Even though it is contrary to the governing body, Jeffrey Jackson, under oath, even though it is against law in many jurisdictions, this is what is happening because the psychology ain't right. You've got coercion. You've got elders getting up and saying, hey, this is the teaching. And then when persons do it, then they backpedal. No, you had free choice. But they used the coercion. They used the power of discipline within the religion, they use that means to create a terrible problem. And so the question is, do we leave it? Do we change it? Do we wait for things to become saturated and at an existential crisis? I think that's where we can stop. Leave those thoughts for you and me to ponder and think about, because it shapes the next step forward. Thank you, friends, family, and everybody again. This is Matthew Millais Gray signing off, and I'm wishing you well.